asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Rap fire, math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. Hope you guys are having a good Monday so far, and we've got a lot to cover tonight. So we'll be talking about Russia and Ukraine. We'll also be updating you in regards to the Freedom Convoy and the gaslighting that seems to continue to go on based upon primarily politicians, but mainstream media is more than happy to help them out. And then finally, I've got a full course of pills for you guys, so we'll go through the full gamut from blue pill to red pill to black pill to clown pill. And finally, we'll end up with the white pill and a couple memes. But before we even jump into our discussions on any of this stuff, I just wanted to share this meme and start off with a meme today because this meme feels very on point in my opinion. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspective as well in the comment section. But right now, this literally does feel like me trying to figure out what news is real and what isn't real regarding Ukraine and Russia. At this point in time, honestly, the moment you feel yourself feeling even slightly emotional about the news you're reading in Russia or Ukraine, you probably need to take a step back and just assume it's propaganda because so much of it turns out to be fake news, propaganda, misleading, missing context, all that jazz. So at this point in time, all I'm certain of is that I don't really know what's going on in Ukraine. And in fact, you know, when thinking about things, we discussed this briefly on Friday's episode, but essentially we found out that the Ghost of Kiev is fake. It sounds like the Snake Island 13 are also fake. It turns out they actually did surrender. They weren't killed. The PM in fatigues, right? Their prime minister in fatigues. It turns out that was from before the Russian invasion. We've also got Miss Ukraine, you know, getting a gun and out there fighting. Turns out, at least the photo op she was in, it was an airsoft gun. We've also got like the children yelling at Russian tanks, and it turns out that was also from a few years ago. And so at this point in time, it's really hard to know whether you're coming or going when it comes to everything that, particularly the mainstream media, but also the counterpoints to mainstream media are sharing. It, like at this point in time, my thesis is, unless it's at least like a week old, which gives everyone enough time to reverse image search and try and get to the bottom of whether it's fact or fiction, I'm not going to hang my hat or my reputation or take anything as 100%. Not that I necessarily ever took anything at 100%, but like doubly so right now when we're talking Ukraine and Russia. Again, love to hear where you guys turn in order to get your information, your facts. Have you found that some things you originally reposted or thought were true ended up not being true? Because, yeah, I honestly haven't posted a lot in regards to what's going on in Ukraine and certainly avoided a lot of things around facts and more just like me posting memes and stuff like that. Because at this point in time, honestly, it only feels like the memes are true when it comes to what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. And the rest of it is all some sort of propaganda. But I guess one last thing on the subject matter of propaganda that I think is important for us all to remember, and I suspect a lot of you are at least of a similar mindset to myself. You know, the same people right now, they're really pushing the pro-Ukraine, you know, the NATO needs to get involved, Canada, US, Europe needs to get involved in what's going on in the conflict in Ukraine. These are the same people that, you know, gaslit us on COVID, on lab leaks, on the effectiveness of vaccines. These are the same mainstream media people that were pushing the Iraq war, Afghanistan wouldn't fall, things of that nature. You know, it's the same media that also questions Trump and Putin's mental health, but they see no issues with Joe Biden. Again, let's think about that. Right now, everyone's questioning the stability and sanity of Putin, and everyone says in mainstream media essentially that, you know, Trump is deranged. There's even like Trump derangement syndrome is what they call it. But none of these same people question the mental faculties of Joe Biden, who honestly, at this point in time, it shocks me whenever he's able to just walk more than a couple steps without falling over. And then finally, this is also the same media that, you know, completely turned a blind eye to what's going on in China with the Uyghurs, right? Literally, we've got real concentration camps in China with over 1 million. I've heard over 2 million people in those concentration camps. They're being re-educated. And some of the more black-pilled stories on that stuff truly is abhorrent. And yet we don't see, you know, banning Chinese goods. We didn't even stop them from hosting the Olympics this year. So I think everything needs to be taken with a giant heap of salt when we're talking about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. But anyways, I still do want to kind of give you guys a rundown on at least some things. But again, reminder, this is literally me trying to figure out what the hell's going on and what's fact or fiction. And before we jump into today's stories, reminder, as always, in the video description down below, you'll find links to all the stories I'm sharing with you guys. I don't want this show to be the end of your fact-finding journey. I really just want this to be the springboard, the jumping off point for you guys to go down your own rabbit holes. Because again, don't just take my word for it. Do your own due diligence, as always. But let's talk about this first. US, UK, Europe, Canada to block Russia's access to SWIFT. And so there has been a couple little deviations from this narrative. Some are saying that it's a complete block from SWIFT. Others are saying like it's a block from SWIFT, but with some asterisks. You know, mainstream media was pushing out also sorts of videos and photos of Russians lined up, you know, trying to withdraw from ATMs. We've heard of currency restrictions, as well as, you know, the restrictions in Russia of non-Russians being able to sell Russian-based assets. Still a very confusing time. I believe that we will likely see the West and NATO continuing to ratchet up sanctions. However, you would expect that Putin and Russia probably already took this into consideration. So I'm not sure how effective they're going to be, at least in the immediate term. But definitely a very dynamic situation, and we'll see how it plays out. Next, this is from the province. Ukraine updates day 5. Russians around... Russian ground forces move closer to Kiev. Convoy stretches for miles. Russia has deployed about half of the forces it had at Ukraine's border into the former Soviet neighbor, Western officials said on Monday. I think this is one of the better synopsises of what's going on. So if you guys kind of want to see the different headlines and stuff, I encourage you to check that out. Link in the video description down below. Next, this is from the National Post. So Canada banning crude oil imports from Russia, sending anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. A third shipment of lethal weapons will be shipped through Poland. So one reason I wanted to highlight this is, you know, going into the weekend, one of the common criticisms, and you guys likely heard it from me as well, was, you know, hey, we actually import a lot of oil from Russia. Are we going to do anything with that? And at the time, it seemed like it wasn't likely going to happen. Now it seems like they are planning to ban it. But again, I've heard some you know, some conflicting narratives in regards to exactly how this ban is going to roll out. So time will tell exactly how this is rolled out and how effective it is. But, you know, we saw lots of photo ops over the weekend of people pouring out Russian vodka. Now, a couple things there. If you already bought the vodka, I'm not really sure if you're spiting Russia that much by pouring out the vodka, because assuming that you're going to need a replacement, you're going to go buy more vodka. Now, presumably it won't be from a Russian vodka distillery. But when you look at it, I didn't see any facts for Canada, but I believe in the United States, I saw one headline that said less than 2% of vodka in the United States was actually from Russian origin. So again, it's interesting, right? This feels a lot like Freedom Fries, right? When they literally wanted to rename French fries to Freedom Fries. And what was the other thing? There's something German as well that I think they tried to rename. But anyways, think back to the Iraq War, right? And how upset America was when the rest of NATO and Europe and the UN, for that matter, didn't all just say, yep, let's go invade Iraq. Now, this one as well from the National Post. This is from Peter MacKay. You may remember him as a former defense minister here in Canada. This was never just Ukraine's fight. Canada is vulnerable to Russia in the north. This is Ukraine's darkest hour. Let us rise to their aid in true historic fashion. And so, again, a lot of these narratives I find are really trying to pull on the emotional strings, right? Rather than rationally looking through things. Now, technically, you know, Russia and Canada do, you know, in the North Pole share a border. However, realistically, from a practical standpoint, the odds of us seeing, you know, Russians come over the North Pole and invade us is very low. Now, the chance that we'll end up in a dispute at some time or another in regards to exactly where those borders are and who has access to the resources, and particularly if there's oil under the sea there, definitely we could see that on a long enough time horizon. But again, understand, as a real member of NATO, if Russia actually invaded us, you know, technically, I think is Article 5 of NATO, you know, our allies would have to come to our defense, or at least they were supposed to. So again, I don't think this is a perfect analogy. Again, we probably will find ourselves at loggerheads with Russia, but it's going to be under completely different circumstances than what Ukraine is going through, and I don't see that in the foreseeable future. But again, I also didn't see Russia going as hard against Ukraine as they currently are. So, take my perspective with a grain of salt. But if you guys want to read Peter McKay's take on it and essentially him beating the war drums for Ukraine, it's in the video description down below. Next from the Globe and Mail, war in Ukraine could put Russia deeper in China's pocket than ever. Here's how Beijing could use that economic leverage. With the ruble in free fall and sanctions hobbling its exports, Russia increasingly finds itself with only one superpower willing to trade, and some fear it could become a satellite state. Now, I think the chances of Russia completely playing into China's hand and becoming a satellite state is likely overblown, but this is definitely something NATO and the West should be paying attention to, right? We don't want to necessarily make two of our arguably biggest enemies, become allies together. And one of my more like conspiracy theories, so like again, I don't have any facts to back this up. This is just me kind of like war gaming the situation. But one of my conspiracy theories is now that I am witnessing Russia go so hard against the Ukraine, one of my theses is this is essentially Russia's last grab at NATO before they realize they need to almost turn their full attention towards China. And so again, in my conspiracy theorist brain, I'm not saying that this is fact, but just something I've been thinking about recently that I thought I'd share with you guys is, could Russia realize that down the road they're actually going to have to be allied with NATO against China, because China and Russia share borders as well, and they both also want spheres of influence in Asia. So with that being said, if Russia knew, 10, 20 years from now was going to have to find itself aligned with the West, with NATO, in order to counterbalance, say, the rising star that is China, I could see them realizing like, oh, we're never going to get parts of Ukraine. We're never going to be able to make this play if we end up having to go full tilt against China. So let's quickly grab what we can before we have to reprioritize our interest. Just a random rambling theory from my end. Now from the Mises Institute, Ukraine's regime is now kidnapping fathers for military service. And this is something that I don't see being commented enough on, the idea of conscription and it being rolled out right now in Ukraine. Again, it may be an unpopular opinion with a lot of nationalists, but I'm never cool with conscription, like ever. No, my body doesn't belong to the state, and so the state can't ever just take full control and dictate what I do with it. Arguably the same sort of logic that I came to when it came to, medical procedures and not wanting the state to be able to mandate what sort of medical procedures I take. So Ukraine's regime is now kidnapping fathers for military service. As the Ukraine regime has imposed martial law in the wake of the Russian invasion, it has also apparently imposed a new near-universal conscription order, USA Today reports. The Ukraine State Border Guard Service has announced that men aged 18 to 60 are prohibited from leaving the country, according to reports. In particular, it is forbidden for men aged 18 to 60 Ukraine citizens to leave the borders of Ukraine, a statement from the service said. According to CNN, this regulation will remain in effect for the period of the legal regime of martial law. We ask the citizens to take this information into consideration. Naturally, in order to enforce this on unwilling conscripts, Ukrainian officials will have to physically force men into service and ship them where the regime dreams or deems them to be necessary. And yeah, couple hot takes on this that I want to share with you guys. One, I can't help but wonder, are the socialist justice warriors going to come out and discuss the sexism or ageism on display from Ukraine in regards to not stopping females from crossing the border, not stopping the old or children for that matter from crossing the border either, and not forcing rifles into their hands and for them to go into a war that clearly, if they're trying to flee Ukraine and cross an international border, they don't really want to participate in. It also arguably shows a certain level of commitment, right, or belief in the current regime and whether they're actually going to be able to succeed in it, right? If you see vast amounts of citizens choosing to not defect, but essentially try and flee as refugees. And then in addition to this, again, understand with history, oftentimes when you look at conscripted armies versus volunteer armies, you don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of conscripts if you're going into battle. And if you were someone that volunteered for it, you want to be surrounded by volunteers that actually believe in the cause and are committed to it, not the ones that are going to turn around and try and flee the moment it happens. Look at historical battles and stuff like that, particularly, this is a little bit biased now, but particularly before the age of guns, and you'll find that the vast majority of all casualties of war are actually during like hasty retreats, right? And again, who retreats the most? Forced conscripts. But anyways, just wanted to share this because it is interesting. And while a lot of people are arguing, beating the pro-Ukraine drum, and that's their right if they so choose to do it, again, this is not freedom, right? Having forced conscription upon your citizenry is not freedom. It's not it's not gallantry. It's not anything, right? Like it's not something to be lauded. Something that should really be um, detested by every freedom-loving individual, because essentially at that point in time, both the state and you, if you give into it, are stating the state actually owns your body and has the right to deem, how to use it. Just not cool, not kosher with me. Next, I want to share this chaos and anarchy in Kiev. Sources: armed bandits are looting and murdering. This is a side of the current conflict I haven't seen really covered a lot, but I understand whenever there's, a lot of anarchy, whenever there's a lot of confusion, whenever we start to see society break down, and whenever you've got war zones, you're also going to see bad actors start to flourish, right? And I think as this continues on, we're going to continue to see a deterioration of trust, both of Ukrainian and Russian officials, and that will only probably lead to more bad actors acting out. So again, this is just an aspect of the conflict I haven't particularly seen covered in mainstream media, or even like on the counterpoints to mainstream media. So thought I'd share it from True North. Again, link in the video description down below. Now I want to highlight this essay from Ron Paul. And again, Ron Paul is he's got to be the best living politician in the history of America, in my opinion. So when the Bush administration announced in 2008 that Ukraine and Georgia would be eligible for NATO membership, I knew it was a terrible idea. Nearly 2 decades after the end of both the Warsaw Pact and the Cold War, expanding NATO made no sense. NATO itself made no sense. Explaining my no vote on a bill to endorse the expansion, I said at the time, NATO is an organization whose purpose ended with the end of its Warsaw Pact adversary. This current round of NATO expansion is a political reward to governments in Georgia and Ukraine, and came to power as a result of U.S.-supported revolutions, the so-called Orange Revolution and Rose Revolution. Providing U.S. military guarantees to Ukraine and Georgia can only further strain our military. This NATO expansion may well involve the U.S. military in conflicts unrelated to our national interests. And again, really well said by Ron Paul. And just wanted to highlight this in regards to even back when NATO was originally being enacted in 1949. So when in 1949, the U.S. Senate initially voted on the NATO treaty, Senator Robert Taft, known as Mr. Republican, gave an excellent speech on why he voted against creating NATO. Explaining his no vote, Taft said, "The treaty is part of a much larger program by which we arm all these nationals against Russia. A joint military program has already been made. It thus becomes an offensive and defensive military alliance against Russia. I believe our foreign policy should be aimed primarily at the security and peace, and I believe such an alliance is more likely to produce war than peace." 100% agree. And, we can look back to any time in history and see how foreign entanglements and alliances usually drag a lot of countries into war, right? Think of World War I and World War II, how they got started, and how the British got dragged into it, and how multiple other countries were dragged into those conflicts. Again, it was oftentimes due to treaties and alliances. And if I was to give them the benefit of the doubt, I'd say the unintended consequences of those treaties. But honestly, I don't know. The military-industrial complex, I think that they know what they're up to. Now, really want to highlight a great article from Matt Taibbi. Putin the Apostle, we thought he would be our bastard. Then he became his own bastard. And, when we're thinking about people that the West or NATO or America in particular thought would be our bastard and then became someone else's bastard or their own bastard, we don't need to look far. We can look to Iraq. We can look to Afghanistan, right? Think of Osama bin Laden and his association with the CIA before becoming public enemy number one. You can also look at Saddam, right? And how originally we supported him, and then he became public enemy number one. And this essay is worth reading from cover to cover. I'm just going to highlight a couple points that are made, though. I would like to point out that we already tried regime change in Russia. I remember because I was there. And thanks to a lot of lurid history that's being scrubbed now with furious intensity, it ended with Vladimir Putin in power. Not as an accident or as the face of a populist revolt against Western influence, that came later, but precisely because we made a long series of intentional decisions to help put him there. Once Putin's KGB past, far from being seen as negative, was viewed with relief by the American diplomatic community, which had been exhausted by the organizational incompetence of our vodka-soaked first partner, Boris Yeltsin. Putin, by contrast, was a man we can do business with, a liberal, humane, and decent European of alert, controlled poise and well-briefed acuity, who was open to anything, even Russia joining NATO. I don't see why not, Putin said. I could not rule out such a possibility. Further on in the article, I've been bitter in commentary about Putin in recent years because I never forgot the way the West smoothed his rise and pretends now that it didn't. It's infuriating also that many of us who were critical of him from the start are denounced now as Putin apologists. I think in part because we have inconvenient memories about who said what at the start of his story. The effort to wipe that history clean is reaching a fever pitch this week. Before they finished the job, it seemed worth getting it all down. So again, I really encourage you guys to read this entire essay because, again, honestly, I hadn't paid a lot of attention to Putin's rise until recently, and then started going down some rabbit holes on my own. And I think this is a great synopsis of it. Then I wanted to highlight from Glenn Greenwald's Substack. And again, you guys really should be a subscriber of his as well. But war propaganda about Ukraine becoming more militaristic, authoritarian, and reckless. Every useful or pleasing claim about the war, no matter how unverified or subsequently debunked, rapidly spreads while dissenters are vilified as traitors or Kremlin agents. And this is definitely a case that I've experienced. And this is an extremely thorough essay, so we're not going to hit upon too much here, but I just wanted to highlight one point. It is genuinely hard to overstate how overwhelmingly the unity and consensus in U.S. political and media circles is. It is as close to a unanimous and dissent-free discourse as anything in memory, certainly since the days following 9/11. Marco Rubio sounds exactly like Bernie Sanders, and Lindsey Graham has no even minimal divergence from Nancy Pelosi. Every word broadcast on CNN or printed in the New York Times about the conflict perfectly aligns with the CIA and Pentagon's messaging. And U.S. public opinion has consequently undergone a radical and rapid change. While recent polling has shown large majorities of Americans opposed to any major U.S. role in Ukraine, a new Gallup poll released on Friday found that 52% of Americans see the conflict between Russia and Ukraine as a critical threat to U.S. vital interests. With almost no partisan division, 56% of Republicans and 61% of Democrats, while 85% of Americans now view Russia unfavorably, while 15% have a positive opinion of it. So again, really well done essay or article on the entire subject matter. I encourage you guys to go down a rabbit hole and spend some time and read it. But what I want to share on this next part here in regards to Ukraine and Russia is highlighting U.S. intervention since World War II. Now, the blog post that I'm actually talking about and sharing with you right now, this was actually written like a year ago. So February 24th, 2021. And it was just highlighting how one of these graphics that I think you'll probably see making the circles now, particularly amongst red and black-pilled individuals, is highlighting U.S. intervention since World War II. And it's actually a very long list. Now, what's brought up is this list was actually prepared by RT, right? So the Russia Today news agency. Okay, but is any of this factually incorrect? I think is the more important question we should all be asking, because there's actually a very long list. And again, these are just the U.S. interventions since World War II that are essentially owned up to, right? That there's either, a huge amount of evidence, or there's literally a smoking gun to point us towards who was behind it. There's a couple different versions of these, and again, this essay is more concerned about trying to get to the bottom of, what which graphics spawned which graphics, and kind of goes down a rabbit hole there. And not to be outdone or to make sure he was pushing the American narrative, he also then highlights Soviet and Russian intervention since World War II, which again, I'm never going to argue that Russia's hands are clean, but I think the bigger question is, why at this point in time should we forget all of the past and immediately trust the American politicians and mainstream media that this one is a war that absolutely has to be fought and is a just war? for NATO and the West to be involved in. And if you guys don't like that source, you can literally find it on Wikipedia as well. So foreign interventions by the United States. And, there's this handy list right to my right here, just highlighting covert United States involvement in regime change. Again, the list is actually longer than this, but even Wikipedia's got a few dozen examples for us there. All right. Now, switching gears and talking about the Trucker Freedom Convoy, the CBC is doing their best to remind you that essentially honking was a form of terrorism. And it's interesting to essentially see, as the mainstream media gets itself worked up and all hot and bothered over the Ukraine incident going on with Russia invading, and yet they also still don't want to completely let us forget about truckers. So I can't even believe that I can believe it, but why the fuck do I pay taxes when CBC gets over $1 billion a year to write this fucking bullshit? The trucks have left Ottawa, but phantom honking lingers for many downtown. Post-traumatic stress from weeks of honking is a temporary mild trauma, psychologist says. Yeah. Okay, bud. And it's just wild, right? Like, how willing they are to demonize the individuals that actually wanted to stand up and fight for Canadians' freedoms. Arguably, the same people that they would now want to get, enlisting in the Ukraine Foreign Legion, or if NATO goes to war, to go over and fight for Ukraine. But at the same time, like, if you have PTSD from people honking for a couple of weeks, and again, depending upon your news source, it seems like they actually did stop in the middle of the night, other than probably the first weekend that they were there. But like, how the fuck are we going to beat Russia in a war if we're concerned about Ottawa citizens having PTSD from horns honking? Now from the Post-Millennial, CBC article complains Ottawa residents are suffering from phantom honking after trucker protests. So if you want a slightly different perspective on this, Post-Millennial is a great counterpoint. Next one to highlight from Blacklock's reporter, claims truckers were rapists. And again, this is so... the gaslighting that the mainstream media and politicians are doing here, and to not have anyone in the mainstream media consistently calling out the politicians on this is just infuriating beyond belief. Because let's be honest, if there were rapes or even consistent threats of rapes coming from the Freedom Convoys, CBC, CTV News, Global News, they would have been all over that shit from day one. There were Ottawans who, this is a direct quote now, there were Ottawans who were subjected to intimidation, harassment, threats of rape, testified Mendocino. No Freedom Convoy member was charged with sexual assault. Conservative MP Larry Brock, Brantford, Brant, Ontario, former Crown prosecutor, challenged the claim Cabinet never mentioned sexual assault over 3 days of Commons debate on the Emergencies Act, said Brock. The most disturbing aspect of what I hear is this rape allegation, a very heinous crime, said Brock. We debated this particular issue for over 40 hours. Not once did the Prime Minister, did you, or any other senior member of Cabinet or any member of your backbench raise a rape allegation. My question to you is very pointed. If that allegation did not result in a criminal charge, will you undertake to provide this committee with proof of the allegation, asked MP Brock. The absence of criminal charges doesn't mean it doesn't happen, said Mendocino. And like, again, at this point in time, it seems like Marco Mendocino is so confident that the Liberals will write the history textbooks on what happened in the trucker convoy that he's willing to just say anything, right? So now it's hard to keep track, but if I remember correctly, according to mainstream media and the Liberal Party, Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters, they're not, individual grassrooted Canadians. They're just frustrated with mandates and lockdowns and masks and all that bullshit. They're actually, Russian-funded trolls. They're anti-democratic. They are racist. They're misogynist. They're rapists. They're Nazis. They're Trumpists. What else is there, right? Literally at this point in time, like, they essentially must have just pulled up the thesaurus of people we believe are bad and named them as everything. I'm waiting to hear that they're jihadists as well, because I think that that's one of the only last bad names that they haven't been called at this point in time. All right. And then Post-Millennial, highlighting the hypocrisy or the craziness that is the situation as well. So again, Trudeau's public safety minister says Emergencies Act was necessary because truckers were potential rapists. So again, like, rape is a very serious crime, and if someone's guilty of that, they should absolutely be punished to the absolute fullest extent of the law. No issues here. However, this idea that like you can just make up an allegation, have no proof for it, and then use that as a justification after the fact, right, to enact emergencies, the Emergencies Act here for the first time ever in Canada, is just so asinine, I can't believe it. And I just want to play this little clip here of an MP kind of calling out Mendocino on this bullshit.
Like, I just don't understand how you could be saying on one hand, there's all these strong ties and this is a national emergency for public safety. And I walked every day by these protests. It just doesn't really add up at all.
Minister, sorry, just 10 seconds, Minister.
Well, I would say first, it's not an insuination. We got the advice from our law enforcement that we've met the threshold. And secondly,
I just
Ms.
can't believe you
Dancho,
put us in danger in that way, to
respectfully,
be
Ms.
honest.
Dancho,
Like,
there
that
were Ottawans who were
seems
subjected
very
to
irresponsible to
intimidation,
me.
harassment, threats of rape. I mean, and those were all supported by
But how could we have
charges,
possibly been allowed to walk by that every day? Like, I just don't understand.
And that's a great question, right? If these were actually serious allegations, why were politicians allowed to walk by it every single day without security escorts, right? And one of the biggest frustrations here is their desire to group in activities in the hopes that they can at least prove one, right? So they're going to say things like, they were intimidated. I forget what his other talking point was. And then there was also threats of rape, right? And so like his real focus is, as long as one of the things I say is true, then the group of things I say is probably true as well. And that's enough to get me the next headline, enough to get the CBC to post another article and all that, right? And it's wild at this point in time because, again, like, let's say that there's a moment where one trucker yells out something inappropriate. And honestly, if I had to guess, it's probably more likely they were yelling at politicians to go fuck themselves. And I understand that that's not actually a threat of rape. That's just literally saying like, hey, Mr. Politician, you should go fuck yourself. And, you know, if someone was to say to Justin Trudeau, go fuck yourself, they're not actually threatening to rape Justin Trudeau. They're just telling Justin Trudeau to go fuck himself. But anyways, enough of the theoreticals here. Again, it's so frustrating to find ourselves in this moment in time where mainstream media just doesn't give a shit about the truth. And politicians understand that mainstream media doesn't give a shit about the truth. So they've got no fears of consequences when they lie, right? Or when they try and hide lies in plain sight. Amongst other facts. And again, even the level of intimidation that the trucker saw, like we're seeing people say that honking horns is the same thing as physical violence. It absolutely is not the same thing as physical violence. And if you believe that, honestly, you should find a safe space and isolate yourself for the rest of your existence from humanity. Do me and everyone else a big fucking favor. Next from Zero Hedge, U.S. trucker convoy swells as it moves across country at D.C. So I haven't been paying a lot of attention to the People's Trucker Convoy in the United States, but just wanted to share an article from it. It sounds like there's 250 trucks in the convoy, according to this article from the Epic Times via Zero Hedge. So if you guys want to learn more, link in the video description down below. And then next, getting into our first blue pill story of the day. Sorry, there's so much going on these days that I'm spending half the show just updating us on the Ukraine and truckers. Let me know if you guys want me to just move on from those subject matters, but I personally still feel like it's actually very important. So from Global News, we aren't far away from lifting Ontario's mask mandates, Doug Ford says. And I'm not going to waste either of our times listening to this asshole, but if you guys want to know the gist of it, he essentially said he's just waiting for the go-ahead from the doctors to tell everyone they don't have to wear masks. And, you know, if you even want me to pretend like you guys give a fuck about any of this, can you point to any data to establish why now you're willing to back off on mask mandates? Why is it starting tomorrow that essentially I won't have to show a vaccine passport in restaurants? And honestly, I'd love to get your guys' thoughts and opinions. I imagine there's a lot of people here that for the last few months or however long we've had these stupid asinine rules haven't been able to go in and sit down in restaurants. Honestly, I've got zero fucking interest in going to any restaurant that implemented this throughout the pandemic. Like, no, you know, at this point in time, only restaurants that have fines. You know, like if you can post a fine in your door as a badge of honor that you actually stood up for Canadians' rights, then I would love to come and become a customer of your establishment. Or maybe I'll only eat in restaurants in Florida going forward. I don't know. But essentially, like at this point in time, I'm not interested in rewarding individuals that were willing to deny me of access to their establishments simply because the government told them to do so. Because we know that they will do it again the moment the government requests it of them again. If you're not paying attention to the way the politicians, the health officials, the mainstream media are framing all of this, they're leaving the door wide open, right? It's not even a crack. They're leaving it wide open for future lockdowns, future regulations. And we're going to cover even that in a certain extent in a Black Bill story. But we're going to keep rolling here. Now from CBC News, Rogers, Bell, and Shaw pull Russian state-controlled channel RT over invasion of Ukraine. Network, the propaganda arm of Putin, Canadian Heritage Minister says. Honestly, this would be a perfect time for the Beaverton to actually be funny and come out with an article and say, like, CBC says Canadians should only listen to Canadian propaganda, because good ideas don't need to be hidden, or lies, don't need to be hidden, and good ideas can afford to be exposed to bad ideas, right? In the end, we should have trust enough in our fellow citizens that good will win out. And yet at this point in time, to see the framing that Russian RT is all Russian propaganda, and it is. But honestly, at least it feels like Russia Today wears on its sleeve that it's Russian propaganda, where CBC, Global News, CTV News, they will all pretend, smile, lie to your face, and then actually still be propaganda wings of governments as well. Because literally the CBC over $1 billion, and the rest of mainstream corporate press legacy media also got, was it over 600 million, if I'm remembering correctly, in the last year, to support them, right? You guys are fucking propaganda too. Just because you lie to yourself at night when you go to sleep doesn't mean it's not true. Yeah. All right. Continuing on from CTV News, in travel restrictions on Canadian U.S. on Canadians, request of a U.S. congressman. And all I gotta say is it's at least nice to see U.S. congressmen caring more about Canadians' freedoms than any Canadian politicians willing to do, right? So again, right now it's probably not going to pass because the Republicans don't control the House. However, I personally think that we'll see at some point in time Democrats opening up to this more and more, because we are in a midterm election in the United States, and unless they just want to destroy their party and their chances of controlling the House, I think that they're going to have to actually start pulling this narrative. So while we live in clown world, and while Canada, is doing everything to hold on to COVID powers, I actually do believe we'll see the U.S. continue to open up more and more. And I do believe that that will eventually force Canadian government's hand as well. But only time will tell. Now, switching gears, let's get into our first red pill story of the day. This is from the National Observer. They're definitely not biased, right? Trumpism has arrived in Canada. And just want to highlight a couple of points, but honestly would be worth reading this entire thing just to understand their perspective. And again, it's fascinating to me that these people in mainstream legacy press, corporate media, they literally can't even fathom the average Canadian actually just being sick and tired of being lied to by politicians, by the mainstream media, by health officials, and being gaslit at every turn of COVID. And instead, they think that it's all misinformation. We somehow were brainwashed by Russian bots. Witness the surge in abuse and violence directed towards journalists during the recent Ottawa protest. As veteran global reporter Sean O'Shea noted, I've never personally experienced so much personal harassment while covering a story. I had rarely needed a bodyguard before. Covering the protest, television crews at all networks need security staff to do our job safely. That's a sad fact. It is a sad fact, but I also think that it's just fascinating to me how blind you guys are in the mainstream corporate press legacy media that you never look inwards, that you never ask yourself, hey, is this maybe a consequence of us just parroting the government talking points for the last forever? Maybe there should be consequences to lying to the Canadian public ad infinite, right? Like at some point in time, maybe they are actually just going to get fed up of you lying to them and have no interest in engaging with you. In fact, yeah, I've got no interest in mainstream legacy press, corporate media, all that bullshit either, because it's a dying institution. It still is propped up because of all the government financial support you get, right? And you should honestly have to disclose what percentage of the total revenues from your organization come from Canadian government sources versus come from actually ad revenue, right? Because I suspect a lot of Canadians' eyes would be opened a lot more if they understood just how much you were dependent on the government dole. And what's fascinating to me is one of the solutions here the National Observer points out is we should fund the mainstream press more money. We should give them more money so they can counter fight misinformation, right? At this point in time, Is there misinformation? Absolutely. But it's also does a disservice to the term misinformation when you literally just paint anyone that disagrees with you as misinformation, right? Like I literally saw, NPCs freaking out on Twitter when individuals were calling out that the Ghost of Kiev is a fake story, right? Or that the Snake Island 13 didn't actually happen. And there's like, well, it shouldn't matter. It's like, no, facts should always fucking matter. If you want to have a good legend, that's fine, but you need to own that it's a legend. You can't pretend that it's a fact and hope that you can just whitewash history. As Brent Jolly, the president of the Canadian Association of Journalists, said in an interview last week, this is what happens when you have brains scrambled by misinformation. Again, literally everyone that disagrees with them just has their brain scrambled by misinformation. We're all just fucking crazy. Should we even be tolerated, right? And this is going to be a bit of a tangent here, but how fascinating is to see Justin Trudeau want to stand up and fight for Ukrainian independence, right, and Ukrainian freedoms when, what, is it 35% of their population is vaccinated? I'm surprised that he even wants to allow the majority of Ukrainians to be tolerated in society, because he sure as fuck wouldn't tolerate them back here in Canada unless they were refugees, right, in which case then he doesn't have any issues. But if they were born and bred Canadians, we shouldn't tolerate them. So more support for the media and other fact-based reporting is an essential part of this broader campaign, as is a renewed focus on teaching civics in our schools and communities. So literally what they're saying here is more government funding and more government brainwashing, and hopefully we'll have, all those free thinkers stop thinking freely. No, the way that you would actually defend your institutions, right? The way that you would actually give real credence, right, and credibility to mainstream corporate press, legacy media, would be to actually become more open and transparent. Really break down for us your sources of income. Actually be open to going on and having debates with the people that you call misinformation. Spend real time fact checking them rather than just dismissing them as having their brain scrambled by misinformation. And again, are there people that believe batshit crazy things? Absolutely. But they actually are on both sides of the equation here, right? If you want to view as right and left, or statists versus freedom individualists, sovereign individuals, whatever. There's no guarantee we can fully inoculate ourselves from the threat of Trumpism. But as recent events in Ottawa have shown, we can't afford to pretend it isn't here or that we're somehow immune to it. Our best hope now is to reinforce the institutions that uphold our democracy and its values as best and as quickly as we can, and hope they can weather the coming storm. Well, this is a red pill. It also technically is a white pill, because it shows you just how thick-headed these individuals are, how stubborn they're going to be, and they're never going to actually treat you like a real person. They're never actually going to treat you like an equal. They're always going to look down on you. They're always going to be elitist, and because of that, we're going to see more and more people get red pilled. And as we mentioned in the past, I've never seen anyone go from blue pill to red pill and decide to go back to blue pill, right? It'd literally be like Homer Simpson when he's talking about when they found out he had the crayon in his brain, right? They removed the crayon. He's a genius, and he decides to put the crayon back up. Well, that maybe works for Homer Simpson. It doesn't actually work for the rest of us. The rest of us aren't going to forget our experiences. We're not going to forget the lies, right? We're not going to forget the fact that you gaslit us every step of the way throughout this crazy pandemic. Globe and Mail focusing on the same thing. Canada's future elections risk mirroring the culture war rhetoric of the United States. And we are in a culture war, whether you want to admit it or not, whether they want to admit it or not. We are in a culture war. And I've discussed this in the past. Honestly, a lot of us that are live and let live, we've done a disservice because we've ignored the culture war. We've ignored the call to action, the call to adventure. And we were hoping that, hey, if I just focus on me, mine, and ours, let them do them and theirs, it'll be enough. It's not. Because it's not enough for them just to brainwash their children. They want to brainwash your children. They want to control you as well as have themselves controlled by, big daddy state government. Canada's next federal election will be a culture war. It's inevitable. This fate is due to three intersecting events: the unequal burdens of COVID-19, the 23-day occupation of our national capital, and a federal conservative party that has surrendered itself enthusiastically to the cause of populist grievance politics. Now, this one's a little bit more balanced than the previous article, but again, it still is very obvious, right? Even in the language you use, the occupation of our nation's capital, right? The enthusiastic embracing by the Conservative Party of these populist grievance politics. No, it's not, right? If anything, Canadians dragged the Conservative Party into this, right? The average Canadian. It wasn't until the Conservative Party realized, like, oh shit, I guess if there's actually going to be a real contender, the PPC, and then we're just going to be liberal light, maybe Canadians don't even need us anymore. That honestly, to say that it's enthusiastically embraced is fucking bullshit. Because honestly, where are the people that were standing up for the truckers, when it was politically expedient, that immediately backed down the moment Trudeau started calling it illegal, the moment he started really pushing on the Emergencies Act, right? Most of the fast allies turned out to be just that and disappeared really quickly for the truckers. But he must also change. And this is one point that I don't think that Trudeau will change, and I don't think the Liberals will change either. But he must also change. It starts with tone. The cliquish, insidery, super registrar that smothers so much of what the government has to say must go. Not everyone speaks in the knowing technocratic keys of management consultant or the language of values laid in exclusivity. If you want to stop your opponent, start by not being what they say you are. And there's actually a grain of truth in that, because they are what their opponents claim they are, right? They literally are elitists. They literally are technocrats. They literally do look down upon you, the average Canadian citizen. And we should not forget that just because they've got a Ukraine distraction to point to. Now from the National Post, Justin Trudeau has been a national embarrassment. This has been an embarrassing period of history that started with a well-received eulogy. If you guys want to check out this article, link in the video description down below. Now from Rebel News, Trump slams Trudeau for the tyranny of Canada's treatment of Freedom Convoy protesters. The tyranny we have witnessed in Canada in recent weeks should shock and dismay people all over the world, said Trump. So again, while I'm not Trump's number one fanboy, he's not wrong here, right? And again, I can't help but feel like the mainstream media, particularly outside Canada, they've moved on in the news cycle. But we here in Canada can't forget, and we can't give up the fact that we were born free, and we're not going to let the government just take away our freedoms just because they believe it's expedient, because they believe that they're better than us. From Zero Hedge now, and I don't know if this is a red pill or black pill. I'm going to count it as a red pill. And this is more just going to be me ranting here, but crypto jumps, stocks pump and dump as cracks appear in global financial system plumbing. I literally have no idea how we're still essentially in the green here, or how we're flat during this Ukraine crisis. It literally does not compute for me. I do not understand how the stock market's able to just kind of keep meandering on while we're talking about essentially blocking Russia from the SWIFT payment system and probably pushing them into the arms of China's digital yuan. Like, I literally don't understand how the economy is holding up, right? We already had a weak economy going into COVID. Then we've got COVID-19. We've got a banking crisis that never got settled, particularly here in Canada back in 08 and 09. And somehow we just keep chugging along. Either I even understand less of economics than I believe, and I don't necessarily think I'm an expert in anything, but I thought I understood a little bit. It literally makes no sense to me. If I wanted to be red-pilled or black-pilled on this, I'd probably attribute it to the fact that politicians and traders and hedge funds, they all expect to see just like infinite money printing, and this is going to be a giant boondoggle where they can all just pigs at the trough and stuff their faces. But outside of that, my only other thought is that this is literally, the elites, the powerful, the hedge fund managers are maybe winding down some of their investments and protecting themselves and their positions. I'll think back to The Big Short, right? And essentially when the agencies were actually willing to downgrade the debt was once the major institutions like Morgan Stanley and such have been able to protect themselves. So I don't know whether we're coming or going from an economic standpoint, but it doesn't compute for me how this is actually how we're able to maintain flatness in our financial markets right now. I don't get it, straight up. All right, another red pill here for you. Antifa site praises axe attack on coastal GasLink site in northern BC. So I'm just curious to see whether we're going to see the Canadian government come out and denounce Antifa, whether we're going to see them actually start being treated like a terrorist organization because they're supporting or promoting this. But Moving on to a black pill here, I just want to highlight, this isn't even a story really, but I'm going to be in the way here. But I want to point out to you guys, essentially, this is from Vice News, but the way they frame this headline, yeah, I'm going to be in the way no matter what I do. But axe-wielding mob totally wrecked a pipeline construction site, police claim. About 20 masked people allegedly caused millions of dollars worth of damage at the Coastal GasLink site, but it's unclear how such a big group got in and out of such a remote area without being caught. So, yeah, just interesting to me that whenever we talk about false flags, we're immediately, gaslit as being conspiracy theorists and crazy. But here's Vice News being like, hey, sure, there's video evidence of people dressed in white wearing masks attacking and destroying all this stuff and literally like shooting flare guns, hitting the vehicle of employees with an axe. But I don't believe it. Police allege this happened. What fucking clown world do we live in? Now from Global News, this is an absolutely amazing article. I encourage you guys to go spend the full time it deserves to be read from cover to cover. This is from Sam Cooper, the guy you've heard me regularly pitching his book, Willful Blindness, here, and based upon what's going on in Canada and essentially all the money laundering, the political corruption, and the capitulation, essentially, of Canadian government to the CCP. But just wanted to highlight this new article from Sam. Over 154 million tied to detained Chinese Canadian oligarch invested in GTA real estate. And again, like all his stuff, it's very thorough, very detailed. He's got a breakdown of the different holding companies and what they're related to, breaks down the financial interest. Again, this is a long one, but trust me, if you've been thinking about reading Willful Blindness and you're like, I don't know if I should, go read this article first, then immediately go to Amazon or your favorite book store and go buy a copy of Willful Blindness by Sam Cooper. Now, from Blacklock's reporter, have a mask, check forecast. So again, this is how the narrative is evolving in real time. Canadians will be carrying COVID masks for months to come, says the nation's chief public health officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, said Canadians should think of mask wearing as a habit like checking the weather. In the months ahead and adjusting to a new way of managing and responding to COVID-19, you might think of checking your local COVID virus activity like checking the weather, Dr. Tam told reporters. You would want to check on the weather to put on a coat, so check on the weather and bring your mask with you. Nope. Hard pass. Absolutely not. And if you guys are still wearing masks, you need to make your own personal medical decisions. But if you're in a not at-risk group, if you're already vaccinated, I think you should give your head a shake if you're really living in such fear and paranoia that you're wearing a mask still. And because again, think back to like the Super Bowl. How many people died in California because, 70, 80,000 people went to the Super Bowl unmasked? I haven't seen the death tolls, but I think if there were something worth bragging about, we'd hear them bragging about it. And for those of you that maybe just do it because it's the path of least resistance, because you're live and let live, you don't like confrontation, it's not going to get easier fighting for your freedoms. That's been a recurring theme we've talked about here regularly. Start fighting for them now. And it's even just small things like not wearing a mask next time you go into Canadian Tire or the grocery store. It's a matter of just getting used to being uncomfortable, right? Because everyone likes to think that they're the person that would fight Nazis, right? They're the sort of people that would volunteer to defend their country. They're the sort of people that would hide Anne Frank in their attic. But if you're literally not even willing to potentially deal with social judgment from strangers because you're not willing to wear a mask because you understand the silliness that is wearing a mask at this stage in the pandemic, you're not the sort of person probably that would hide Anne Frank. You're not the sort of person that would take up arms to defend their country. You're not the sort of person that actually would stand up and speak out when the time called for it. And again, I'm not saying that it's going to be easy for everyone, but you need to build up that muscle, right? You need to build up your comfort level with standing out and speaking up. All right, continuing to roll on here. This was from the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine. I'm asking all major crypto exchanges to block addresses of Russian users. It's crucial to freeze not only the addresses linked to Russian and Belarusian politicians, but also to sabotage ordinary users. Again, this is just a reminder, not your keys, not your coin. Get your fucking Bitcoin off of exchanges, people, because the government's going to continue to weaponize money. And they're going to weaponize it in every aspect. We saw them try it here in Canada against the trucker protesters. We're seeing them now implement it against just average, everyday Russian citizens. And they will absolutely use in the future when they believe it's expedient as well. So not your keys, not your coin. Get your Bitcoin off of public exchanges. Right now, if your Bitcoin's sitting in Binance, in Shakepay, and any of the, I barely use any of the exchanges, so I'm just not even familiar with most of them. Get it off there, right? You can buy it there if you so choose. Again, we've talked about Bitcoin privacy. I encourage you guys to do more research. You can check out Maple Pill clips if you want to watch a clip where I share resources on how to make your Bitcoin more private or how to buy private Bitcoin. But regardless of where you're buying it, once you buy it, take it off of those public exchanges because someday you will be the thought criminal that they will come for. You will be the person, the minority that they want to penalize or make an example of. From Blacklock's reporters, gas engine bans unpopular. No shit, Sherlock. Canadians are wary of Cabinet's climate change plan to ban the sale of gas and diesel-fueled cars, pickups, and SUVs in the name of personal choice and freedom. Says in-house Privy Council office research, Cabinet is mandating that all sales be electric by 2035. Now, for those of you that are fully versed in Black Pill, I think we understand and know why they're pushing this so hard. It's got nothing to do with the climate. It's got nothing to do with green energy. It's got absolutely everything to do with control. And personally, I think that we'll see a premium leading up to the ban where we're going to see people paying a significant premium for used cars because they're not going to want to have these new cars. These cars will also have kill switches and things like that that the government will be able to access. But again, they'll only ever do it for your safety, comrade. But I think that we're going to see a huge premium develop. I personally think, again, I'm not a mechanic. I'm not an expert when it comes to vehicles. I personally think we'll see an even greater premium for diesel vehicles for a multitude of reasons. One, my understanding is diesel fuel can last longer and survive better in storage. Diesel engines, also my understanding is they're a little bit more robust. So if you're looking at alternative fuel sources, again, you'll probably have better luck with a diesel engine than a gasoline engine. So in the next 13 years, I think it's probably time to do some research and prepare accordingly. Because again, if they can control your mobility, if they can control your finances, they're starting to really narrow in on all your freedoms. If they can control your medical choices, see where I'm going with this? All right. Now from Timcast, CDC revises guidelines saying roughly 70% of Americans no longer need masks. The CDC has updated its modeling and guidance to account for natural immunity, vaccinations, and natural treatments. So again, if you guys want to check out how they're kind of, backpedaling on this, link in the video description down below. I suspect that we'll eventually see Canada also coming out with similar sort of guidance. Now from the province, COVID so technically, I don't know whether this is a clown pill or black pill, but I'm going to treat it like a black pill. COVID from live animals at Wuhan lab food market, not lab studies. The data found that the virus likely spread to people either working or shopping at the market. Now, there's a bunch of things to dissect here, but first of all, studies. Well, actually, there's two studies, and they were co-authored by the same author. So I think we should maybe take that with a grain of salt. So Michael Warby, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Arizona who co-authored both studies, said the evidence supports the market theory. Now, I personally think that, and we saw the CDC from China come out right around the same time with their own study supporting this narrative as well. Honestly, I personally think you're retarded if you're going to believe this at this point in time. I don't know how else to frame it. And again, I'm preparing for the fact I'm going to someday get kicked off of YouTube here, guys. So a reminder, you can sub to me on Rumble or BitChute or other platforms that are less likely to consider me a thought crime and ban me. But I don't know what else to say at this point in time. And personally, I think that what we're going to see the angling on in regards to the study is they're going to say that it's spread from the food market. But again, understand that from day one, back in the lab leak theory, one of the lab leak theories was that an employee from the Wuhan lab of virology went to this market and spread it at this market. So again, just because it's spread at the market and the market might be one of the original sources doesn't mean it actually came from animals. Again, it's just funny. We shared that story last week, right? Where it said it was a 1 in 3 trillion chance that one of the pieces of the DNA in the DNA or RNA of the virus that it would actually come from nature. Yeah. So you can either believe 2 studies co-authored by the same author, or you can look at the 1 in 3 trillion chance of it actually having that piece of Moderna, I think it was RNA that had been patented back in 2016. Again, maybe someday, years from now, we'll look back and it'll be definitively proven it came from the lab or from the food market, I should say. But at this point in time, I think the burden of proof is exceptionally put upon the individuals that want to argue for the food market versus the lab leak. Okay. Now, this next story here, I'm not even going to get into it. I'm not promoting this as a source of information, but if you wanted to find a collection of all the different conspiracy theories, and some of the shit in this article is like definitively not true, but if you wanted to see one compilation of a bunch of conspiracies all kind of blended together in regards to Ukraine and Russia, there's a link in the video description down below to this civilian intelligence network website. And again, I'm not endorsing it. If you're going to read this, I think you then absolutely need to go on a giant fact-finding mission in addition to this and its sources. But there are also at least a handful of facts in here that are verifiably true. There's also a handful of facts in here that are verifiably false. But if you want just a nice collection of a bunch of conspiracy theories, here's a good one to start with. Now, let's get on to some clown pills. Not sure if you guys saw this one making the rounds earlier on, but I definitely found it to be a clown pill. Watch this dude. His magazine just falls out. And you can just see that awkward moment of, fuck, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to put the magazine back in because I'm probably just an actor or a volunteer that's just here for a photo op. And someone literally comes back, hands him the magazine, and then he just holds it there awkwardly. Now, the reason I highlighted this isn't because this discredits the entire Ukrainian freedom movement, but there is so much bullshit being spread right now. And honestly, again, like I said, the moment something gets you an emotional reaction, I think you have a duty to go on your own little fact-finding mission. A lot of the photos and video clips we're seeing posted are actually from previous points in time in history, right? So again, Google reverse image does exist. That's usually a good starting point in regards to figuring out at least a basis of whether something's fact or fiction. But it's wild how many people in mainstream media seem to have forgot of that, and they're just jumping to conclusions with everything that they get shown now. Next, clown pill here. Just want to highlight this. Whoa, Devin Archer was sentenced to a year in prison for fraud. FWIW, for what it's worth, Archer had a lengthy meeting with Biden at the White House April 16th, 2014. April 21st, Biden flies to Kiev. April 22nd, it's announced Archer joins board of Ukrainian gas company Burisma. May 13th, Hunter joins Burisma. Again, if you guys want to go down a giant rabbit hole, look into Ukraine and Biden. Look into the one name you're not even allowed to say on YouTube, or the algorithm automatically boots your channel. That is a real thing. And again, understand that Biden has bragged on recording on a stage that he essentially got the prosecutor that was looking into shenanigans in Ukraine fired, right, when he was vice president. Honestly, the fact that the mainstream media acts as if Trump bad guy, Biden good guy, just like, for someone that like values truth, authenticity, and transparency, it literally drives me fucking insane. Again, that's not to say that Trump is some amazing, perfect individual. Like I've said, if there's any perfect politician, it's probably Ron Paul. And the fact that I'm only willing to give him a probably shows you how discerning we should be when we're focusing on trying to make someone a hero. But the Bidens are just as fucking corrupt as, well, no, probably no one's as corrupt as the Clintons, but they're comparable to the Clintons. So again, I encourage you guys, go on your own fact-finding mission, but definitely wanted to share that clown pill there. And this is from HuffPost. Could a small nuclear war reverse global warming? Nuclear war is a bad thing, right? So this is where we're at in the timelines. These people hate humanity so much that they're willing to even just entertain the idea that, like, hey, maybe if we killed a ton of them, it would actually be good for the environment. Um, uh, how do you not say that these are just like demon people? I don't know, but let's move on to the white pill. And I was struggling really to find a white pill story. At the last moment, someone shared in Discord the fact that, it looks like New Zealand will be very slowly inching its way towards freedom. That is a net positive thing. But I didn't have a lot of time to put this together, so this is really hobbled together. But one, I got a piece of mail in the mail this week, so we're going to be doing a Mailbag Monday episode at 8:20 p.m. On the same channels that you guys are currently watching this. So I encourage you guys to check it out. And plus, Dan, the NFT boy, he's actually put together a mailbag song for us. So originally, I meant to make this transparent, but I screwed up my Premiere Pro settings. So you guys will just have to deal with the black screen. But it's a pretty cool song.
Welcome to the Mailbag Monday show with your host, Matt McKeever. Let's open some mails, leave some smoke trails. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack, live stream every Monday. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day.
All right, guys. Well, I thought that was a lot of fun. Really appreciate Dan putting together the theme song. That's also the address if you guys want to send me anything in the mail. Good vibes only. And yeah, essentially the deal is whenever you guys send me a piece of mail, a postcard, a letter, whatever it is, every week that at least I get one piece of mail from you guys, we'll go live here, open it up, share it with you guys on the Mailbag Monday episode. I'll often be smoking weed on Mailbag Mondays as well. And tonight we're going to be having a special guest. So my buddy and business partner, Dan, the NFT boy that put together that amazing song, he's going to be coming on. We'll just be hanging out, goofing around, talking about NFTs. If you guys have any questions about anything, it can be about NFTs. It can be about world affairs. It can be about real estate. That's essentially kind of your chance to do an Ask Me Anything with me. But let's get back to the show. So that's it for white pills. And we're done with the clown pills. So I want to wrap up here with a meme of the day. And I was trying to think, I forgot what the name of this movie is. But it's a great movie and it feels more relevant than ever before. So I encourage you guys to check it out, although I forget its name. But me working 70 hours a week to keep up with 7% inflation, listening to a 79-year-old sexual predator tell me how Ukraine is important to daily American life, knowing full well his motive is protect his personal investments so his crackhead son can continue to get $50,000 a month in kickbacks. And so, first of all, I just want to say, technically, Hunter Biden was getting $83,000 a month initially when his contract started. So technically, it was more than $50,000 a month. And you got to remember that literally in an email, they said you got to kick up 10% to the big guy. Now, most people with more than two brain cells to rub together realize the big guy is actually Joe Biden. So again, thought this was very on point. One of those like laugh out loud until you sort of cry memes, but here we are. That's where we're at in the timeline. I appreciate everyone that's been jumping in the comments, hanging out, sharing their perspective. If you haven't done so, please consider hitting that like button, hitting the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Again, if you guys hate watching this on Big Tech, I don't blame you. You can go watch me on Rumble or BitChute, where I upload the replays, usually within an hour or two of these lives. And you want to follow me on Instagram, I recommend following me, Matt McKeever Unfiltered on Instagram. And you can also follow my main Instagram account that's a little bit less political, Matt McKeever85. Please do not fall for the spammers and scammers. Be very careful when you're looking at it. I'm never just going to randomly follow you out of the blue and start DMing you. Particularly, I'm not going to follow you out of the blue, start DMing you, and then try and pitch you to either send me crypto or buy a crypto course or any shit like that. Again, I put together free e-guides on crypto. I put together free e-guides on Bitcoin. I'd love for you guys to do your own research and get into Bitcoin, because I do think until we fix the money, we can't fix the world. And we'll probably never fix it perfectly, but I think it could be a better version of itself than it is today. So I encourage you guys to go do that. But before we wrap up, I want to jump into the chat because I really do appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation with me. So we got Al in the chat. Hey, what's up? We've got Graham. We've got Al. The rumor I heard is that all these false flag Ukrainian stories are all AI computer generated footage content. Interesting. Al says unverified, of course. We've got Leah in the chat as well. The alliance against Iraq was labeled coalition of the willing. Yeah. Peter's in the chat again. We've got April. Conscripted troops are terrible soldiers. They don't have the same drive, discipline, and overall patriotism to the country. Absolutely agree. Again, the government shouldn't be able to force you into medical procedures. They shouldn't be able to force you into war. Again, those of you that want to, join the Foreign Legion in Ukraine, by all means, you go do you. But at the same time, if you get yourself shot or killed in the Foreign Legion in Ukraine, that shouldn't immediately drag Canada or NATO or the West into that conflict. In fact, I think it's great to see individual citizens decide to put their money where their mouth is. So if you want to donate to Ukraine, if you want to donate to the war, I encourage you to do so. Now, two things that is interesting, though, is while in Canada, it became illegal and essentially a crime to donate to a completely peaceful trucker protest in our own country, fighting mandates and demanding individual freedom for Canadians. There's no issue with you donating money or crypto to fund a foreign war, as long as it's on the Ukrainian side, right? Because if you donate to Russia, as we've seen, they're probably going to ban your shit as well. Pastafarian says, here we go, watching it live again with me, 20 best friends. Appreciate all you guys that do watch these videos live. Means a lot to me that I know there's a lot of things competing for your time and attention. So the fact that you would spend it here with me means a lot. And again, one of the big reasons behind me wanting to put together the Maple Pill in the first place was, one, to remind myself that I'm not alone and crazy. And two, create common knowledge for you guys. You're not alone and you're not crazy. I'm sure some of you hear me rambling on. You're like, hey, at least I'm not as crazy as Matt. Tara says, hey, Matt, I recommend following Amir Tisafadi, 243 followers on Telegram for minute-by-minute updates on Russia, Ukraine. He lives in Galilee and has a ton of contacts on the ground sending him live footage of bombing, just a ton of great information, is non-biased, and is just factual, like, here's what just happened in Kiev, and here's a video of Russian missile being shot down in Belarus, and here's a nuclear reactor in Ukraine. Great info there. Appreciate it, Tara. And again, it is hard to know, though, because I've even seen, there was that one residential building that was hit by a missile in Ukraine, right? And originally we were told that was a Russian attack. And in fact, a lot of the mainstream media made it sound like it was on purpose. The Russians were attacking residential targets. And then it turned out that, like, oh no, it was probably actually an anti-air missile from Ukrainian forces. So again, I think that's great. I'll definitely check them out. Appreciate the recommendation. But again, I think at this point in time, it's hard to know, like, even if the photo's true, it's hard to know the exact cause of some of the photos until several days or honestly weeks after the fact. And again, there'll be certain times that we'll probably just never know. The Hungarian experiment, I hope they are smashing the like button. Again, appreciate those of you that do. Oh, there's a ladybug that almost flew on my camera. Al says the Hungarian experiment. We've got April Simmons. Laugh my fucking ass off. Don't honk at that idiot driver in front of you when driving, or else you will be labeled a terrorist. Yeah, and I think, was it just the city of Calgary or Edmonton? They've also outlawed honking at protests now. Put earplugs in, or they can take their daily chill pill. Again, I don't think that we want to see, society just become overrun with people honking all the time. But I also think that it's more than a stretch of the imagination the way the mainstream media is portraying all this. April says, rapists don't bring bouncy castles and give food to homeless everyone. Yeah, at least it doesn't seem to be a common tactic of theirs. And again, it's important to distinguish between one bad actor, right? Like, you get 10,000 humans in a room. I don't actually know the statistics, but I wouldn't be shocked to learn out of 10,000 humans that there's probably a rapist, right? That there's probably a pedophile in that group. However, we don't immediately pay, like, if we use the same logic, let's take a step back here. If we use the same logic that politicians use against the truckers right now, the moment someone says anything stupid, the moment someone does anything bad, that immediately makes them all bad in that group. Well, fuck, it doesn't take that much hard looking to find bad politicians, right? Look at, like, the Franklin cover-up is something I've been referring a lot from the 90s, the 80s and 90s, that's, like, extremely verifiable at this point in time, all their facts. But again, we don't need to look far in the past to see Epstein and things of that nature. And, like, again, somehow we're willing to essentially let Prince Andrew continue on in society, despite the fact that he pretty much admitted to, right, donating $10 million or coming to a settlement of $10 million. And yet we don't immediately say that everyone in the royal British family is evil, or at least like most of us don't. I probably do think that they're all evil. And while they may not be lizard people, they are definitely bad people. But again, it's not good to paint with such a broad brush, regardless of where we find ourselves. Tara says, I'm with you, Matt. If restaurants didn't welcome me to come in and dine in the last year, then I'm not interested in giving them my money now either. It's like saying I've been good this week, so Daddy didn't beat me, but hopefully he won't beat me next week if he's in a bad mood. Ain't got no time for that. I know my worth. 100% agree. And again, hopefully we'll see, new businesses creep up in the coming months and years that will really have strong standing and footing, right? Like, again, I understand for a restaurateur, it puts you in a very difficult position, but there were other options available to a lot of restaurants, right? Like you could go literally pick up only. And rather than discriminate and allow some individuals to sit in your restaurant, you could literally just force your entire restaurant into pick up only if you were scared of fines. Or you could have actually just not given a shit and stood up like a handful of businesses actually did. Terry says, I'm still curious, Matt, how there was no COVID outbreak with the protest mainstream media. Yeah, again, that if there would have been like a spike in COVIDs or COVID deaths, they would have been all over that shit, just frothing at the mouth, jerking each other off. Like they would have just been losing their shit on it. And it's very clear that the data didn't back up a lot of their theories. So they ignore that part, right? That inconvenient truth. Leah says, pulling Russian propaganda is the cracked door of all censorship, like we aren't already censoring. Yeah, 100% agree. Mainstream media would have loved it. Same the government. Yeah, if people had gotten sick, they would have absolutely enjoyed it. Again, that tells you how perverted, how distorted their worldview is at this point in time. That like they don't actually care about the human. They just want to be right. They just want to penalize those that don't go along with their narrative, right? Like if you got double vaxxed, if you got like 10 needles sticking out of you right now, I don't really give a shit. As long as you're going to leave me alone and let me participate in society the same way as you would any other citizen, regardless of their medical choices. Cool. You can literally go do you, right? Again, if you want to protest every weekend on the side of the road trying to educate people about vaccine safety and try and decrease vaccine hesitancy, awesome. You go do you. But it should absolutely never be forced or mandated, right? And understand, at the end of the day, well, they'll pretend that it's an incentive, right? No. All government rules, all government regulations, all tax is actually backed up by the threat of violence, right? And again, they'll pretend that it's not violent, but the same fuckers that claim honking a horn is violent are also the same ones that are like, no, just close down your business then if you don't want to have to do a QR passcode vaccine bullshit thing. And it's like, no, you understand that you saying that we have to shut down our businesses because we want to serve unvaccinated individuals is trying to institute far more violence, right? Sending out inspectors, sending out armed policemen with those inspectors, right? Has the threat of violence behind it. At the same time, you're going to say that honking a horn is violence. It's just so fucking disingenuous. Terry says, thanks again, Matt. Love watching news from the Citadel. Appreciate it. Leah says, yeah, and that BH Freeland saying all the same stuff. The Freedom Convoy people were saying all this time, but about Ukraine. Absolutely. And I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole, but like you guys can go back during the Orange Revolution, right, in 2014, and she wrote an essay called My Country and My People about Ukraine. And this is our our deputy prime minister, right? And our deputy prime minister is referring to the Ukraine as her country and her people. I mean, I get it. People will like throw around terms like that a lot, but like technically, I don't know if you're prime minister or vice or deputy prime minister of a country. I feel like you should actually be 100% committed to that country. And honestly, the affairs of other countries shouldn't be taken in consideration, right? Like it's so frustrating because I can only imagine, like, if it wasn't the Ukraine, if it in fact was, say, whatever, Ireland, if it was England, if it was Germany, right? And someone referred to Germany as their country and their people, I feel like that would get painted with a much different brushstroke than the Ukraine or what Christia Freeland does. Hungarian Experiment says, I think there's a lot of people going from red pill to blue pill with all this war propaganda going on, plugging right back into the matrix after finally getting red pilled. Yes and no. I think that they probably are in this issue, right? And I think it's just because, like, the real violence of war, and honestly, the state's just so much better at propagating propaganda for war. They've had so much more practice at this than COVID measures and other things. But again, that's just my thought. Yazzie Bro says, to everyone, what's the Rust UKR deal? Our mainstream media is utterly corrupt. Rust media, utterly corrupt. UKR, mainstream media, utterly corrupt. Absolutely agree. And Yazzie Bro, that's why I kind of think that at this point in time, we actually need to like wait until facts come in. And that's frustrating because shit's actually happening live on the ground, but it's so difficult to separate fact from fiction. And even the handful of individuals that have great intentions. Oh shit, I've already gone past. It's 8:20. All right. I'm going to wrap up here. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I'm going to go live on, I'm going to go live right after this, and we'll hang out and do a Mailbag Monday episode. I didn't realize how carried away I'd gotten on this episode. But I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and looks like there's lots more comments, so I apologize for not being able to get to everyone's. But again, appreciate you guys spend the time with me. Glad that you guys are doing your own information fact-finding journey. And again, don't take my word for it. Links to everything we're going to discuss or that we have discussed in the video description down below. I want this to be the jumping off point for you guys, not the end point of your research gathering. Appreciate you guys. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you guys want, I'll be getting high shortly with Dan, the NFT boy, talking about NFTs, playing the mailbag song, and a bunch more. Appreciate you guys.